just knew that I felt really bad physically, emotionally, even mentally. And it actually led to me quitting that career after 10 years in law enforcement because my body just couldn't handle it. And it took a doctor that I was going to at the time. I kept going to her and going, I'm eating, so well and so few calories, but I can't lose weight. And I'm experiencing all these like food reaction symptoms, and all of this stuff was happening. And at one point, after several months of working together, she looked me in the eye and said, Cara, your job is killing you. And that was the first time, she didn't say burnout. She didn't say any of that stuff, but that was a huge moment for me.
What if the way you define success is actually leading you straight to burnout? In this episode of Give Yourself Some Leeway, I'm joined by former Special Agent Cara Chace, who shares her personal journey through burnout and how her understanding of it has evolved over the course of her career. We talk about recognizing the early signs of burnout, the difference in how men and women often experience it, the power of micro habits, and how to create white space in your life. If you've ever felt stretched too thin while chasing success, this episode is for you. Cara, welcome to Give Yourself Some Leeway. It's great to have you here on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yes, it really is. When we were first talking, you had mentioned that you went through burnout 3 times. What was that like for you?
Well, every time that has happened in my adult life, it's been a little more eye-opening for me. And I'm at the point now that I can recognize it so much better than when it was 20 years ago, about 20 years ago, when I experienced burnout for the first time. So the first time was during my first career. I was a special agent for the federal government in law enforcement. And as you can imagine, that can be very high speed, very demanding. Quite literally, the government owns you. So you have no control over your time, what you're doing. I was on call 24/7. And after several years in that career, I started experiencing burnout, but nobody was talking about that 20 years ago. Nobody was using those terms. I just knew that I felt really bad physically, emotionally, even mentally. And it actually led to me quitting that career after 10 years in law enforcement because my body just couldn't handle it. And it took a doctor that I was going to at the time. I kept going to her and going, I'm eating, so well and so few calories, but I can't lose weight. And I'm experiencing all these like food reaction symptoms, and all of this stuff was happening. And at one point, after several months of working together, she looked me in the eye and said, Cara, your job is killing you. And that was the first time, she didn't say burnout. She didn't say any of that stuff, but that was a huge moment for me. And I didn't quit right away because our life depended very much on my income as well. I had no idea what I was going to do, but eventually I was able to quit that career and moved on. And there were several years in there where I was just kind of feeling into what was next and what I was going to do with the rest of my life. What I thought I was going to do for, a 25-year career is not what ended up happening. So eventually I ended up in digital marketing, social media marketing, and I built my own marketing agency, which was amazing. And I got to work with some really cool clients and people. But again, I hadn't really learned that lesson about what burnout looks like and feels like. And so I was bringing on clients all the time, building a team. This was way back when in social media, like, 2015, 2016. So it really was just the start of businesses really having the tools to use social media in a way that was much better. So for example, if I had an Instagram client, I would have to log into their Instagram account from my phone and log out. You couldn't be logged into multiple accounts. So I was sitting watching Netflix on my couch, logging in and out of different client accounts on Instagram at the time to be able to engage and post and comment, all of those things. And I mean, it between building a team, which is not my skill set, I'm very comfortable with saying that now. Building a team and managing a team is not what I love to do. And then the constant being on my phone for clients across tons of different social media platforms really just, it burned me out in a very real way. I wasn't paying attention to my toddler at the time. My relationships suffered, friendships, husband, all of those things that I think now we recognize as you need to have some boundaries. At the time, again, nobody was really talking about that. And what eventually happened is I started shifting away from this digital marketing agency model for my business. And it all kind of came to a head around 2021. We moved to a different state, and I realized I didn't want to be doing marketing for clients so much anymore. And I kind of let go of my clients one by one. But then what happened is I had a pretty extreme diagnosis for why things just weren't working well for me, why I couldn't function very well. I was having a ton of physical symptoms, and I was diagnosed, I think it was 2021, 2022, with Lyme disease and mold toxicity and a whole bunch of co-infections that happen with Lyme disease that I actually think probably had been present in my body for many, many years at that point. And I just didn't know what was happening. And there's still not a lot of good tests for all of those things. And it led me to shutting down my business for over 2 years because I was so sick that really all I could do was function as a mom and managing my household and my life. So the start of that journey of being a type A high achiever, hoop jumping, people pleaser, do all the things to no, I have to stop. I have to stop. My body is not letting me do any of those things at this point. And I can either continue to limp along and feel worse or just take a beat and really assess what I'm doing, what I want to do, and how I want to move forward as someone who truly wants to create and have an online business and help people. So that's that. I don't know if that's the long or the short version, but yes, I've experienced burnout several times from my very first career as a young woman, a 22-year-old, to now in the latest version of what I am doing as an online business and how that has shown up in different ways in my life.
Thank you for sharing that, Cara, because some people don't realize it for what it is, or they downplay it or dismiss it. And it's only in hindsight, hindsight's 2020 that way, that they look back and be like, oh, that's what I was going through. Oh, I've been through this before. And it all starts to make sense. It was,
Yes.
for me, it was, I can look back and see times where I was on the verge of burnout, but because no one had ever told me what it was, I was like, oh, I must be, I just, it must be something going around. I must be getting sick, or
Right.
there must be something wrong with me that I can't work at the same level as everyone else. And
Right.
it was always the self narrative because no one explained what was going on. And I didn't know who I could approach to talk about these things, that I said, oh, there must be just something wrong with me. No one else is going through this. No one else seems to be complaining or worrying about these things. So I shouldn't complain either. And it wasn't until it got so bad that I needed to take a step back. And I thought I was having a heart attack at 27. And I was cured. I was like, I'm not unhealthy. I go to the gym all the time. I'm pretty
Right.
fit, but why am I was hyperventilating. I was having my first panic attack, and I thought it was a heart attack because I didn't know what was going on. But
Right.
at the same time, even though I was working with so many people around me, I didn't ask any of them for help. I just sat in the corner until I could regain control. And then I said, okay, now I'm leaving and going to see my doctor. But I didn't want to
Right.
tell anyone. And even in realizing that, as you said about
telling yourself you need to take a step back and not do the work. And even for that, that was a struggle for me. I felt so much shame that I was letting everyone down. I was putting the work on my colleagues, and in reality, they didn't. They just thought I was sick, and they just
Right.
carried on as normal. But it was my
Right.
own narrative that was beating me up and criticizing and putting me down for not achieving, not being the best, for letting myself get into this state in the first place.
Yes. Well, and I think there's two layers of that, because I very much identify with all of that. One piece of it is the story you've told yourself that usually comes from how you grew up, right? Achieving, doing all the excuse me, achieving, doing all the things and performing at a high level, whatever success looks like to you. And then the other layer is what we see on social media, the highlight reels, what you think you're supposed to be doing, particularly if you're in the online business space or a content creator, you see everybody else having all this success, whether that's real or not. So it's not only coming at you internally from the lessons you learned growing up or the stories you've told yourself, but it's also constantly this barrage of what you see online that people are telling you success needs to look like or what you need to do to achieve success. And I think one of the things that we forget is that you define what success looks like for you, right? There's no shortage of people that will show you what they think success is, whether it's, standing in front of a car with a bunch of money, or here's my 7-figure launch, or here, whatever it is. And I think I've told this story before, but the first time I realized that I could have and did have a different version of success, when I realized I was making a significant financial contribution to my family while working from home part-time and able to really be present with my kids. That was like, this is good. This is really good. And if this is what success is, as far as the best I get, that is good with me. So yeah, it's real interesting to try and tease apart all of those conversations that we take for granted because they're told to us.
Yeah, I love that because it's when you as you have put together there about your own definition of success, when you're and especially for me, I was chasing the metrics of the external validation for a while. It took me so long to realize what my definition of success was that I spent so long just meeting other people's expectations of, oh, once you get the house, once you get the car, and I'm like, okay, I'm ticking the boxes, but I don't feel happy. I didn't feel fulfilled. Everyone else from the outside looking in is like, oh, Eugene's great. Oh, Eugene is the rich uncle and all this. And I was like, that's a very strange narrative because I don't see myself that way. If you really knew what was going on, and
Right.
so it was the picture that they were painting from the outside. But for a time, I sought that external validation. So I didn't care what picture they painted. I was
Right.
happy as long as I was getting the validation. But when it all came crumbling apart, and when I said, I don't want any of this, I would give away the house, the car, everything just to breathe easily.
Yeah.
And then they're like, "Oh, you're throwing your life away, like you're having a midlife crisis." I'm like, I've never felt happier by getting rid of all of those extra things that people thought gave status or validation. I'm like, I would rather just sit alone and be by myself and spend some alone time with me than have
Right.
all of those external things. And I feel like a
Absolutely.
scary place for some people to be.
I experienced that in the same way, in the biggest way, when I left my career in law enforcement. So much the same as you, I was getting paid very well. I was able, with my husband, excuse me, I was able with my husband to buy our first home when I was 23 years old. I was making 6 figures by the time I was 27, which at the time, 6 figures was still like, you've made it. High speed career, all of those things. And when I decided to leave, there were so many fellow agents who were like, you're crazy. because law enforcement, at least at the federal level, is you still get a pension in the United States, which is unheard of now. Lifetime health benefits that you have access to, that is better than other health benefits that you might get in other careers or the private sector. All of these things. And really what it was their fear of they could never do that. Right? So it was them projecting on me. They didn't have the guts to do something like that, even if they were experiencing the same things that I was, the health issues and the anxiety. I also started to see when I was in law enforcement, it really changed so much of my perspective on people and humanity and culture and societies in ways that I didn't like. I didn't like how it was changing that perspective. So all of these things that I'd say most people, they are willing to just deal with to their own detriment because of the safety, the security, the money, all of those things. So when they came to me or were telling me you're crazy or what are you thinking or you're so stupid or you're, all of those things, I was able to see, thankfully, at the time that this is about them, not about me. But when I decided to shut down my digital marketing agency and then I took the 2 years off, there were definitely those feelings of, does this make me a failure? What are other people going to think? My competitors, who I know have their eyeballs on what I'm doing all the time, what are they going to think when, I've shut everything down or I've decided to, not make a significant income because I need to take care of myself and those things, both of them can't happen at the same time right now, at least with the way my life is right now. So I think that comparisonitis and what do other people think or what are they going to see? That was definitely another lesson I learned in this cycle of, okay, I'm back in this burnout space. And now the problem isn't I'm leaving a career and guaranteed income and pension and all of those things. Now the lesson is, can I care less about what other people think? It's a very different space, and it's evolved so quickly over time with technology and social media.
And what you've highlighted there is the golden handcuffs. And that was a lot of what I experienced too. It was a lot of people saying that when I first started the podcast, I was still working full time in the company that I had burnt out in. And I was explaining my story, and they said, "Oh, we prefer if you didn't share that because it looks bad." And I'm like, the point I'm making, if you listened, wasn't that the workplace burnt me out. It was my relationship with the work that I did. And I said, so if you even listened to the first episode, you would know that I did not badmouth or deface anyone. And they were like, oh, but if people know who you are and they know where you work and they know that you feel stressed, that does not look good. And I was like, okay. Yeah, I wouldn't be stressed about the work that I do if I didn't care about the work that I do. And then so I made that point. And then they're like, yes, but you know that you're putting your career on the line. It's career suicide to talk about your mental health. And I was like, okay. I was like, and if I hadn't done the work first, if I was still in the inner critic space, where I was like, oh, Eugene, it's shameful to talk about these things, I would have shut up. I would have taken everything offline, dug my head in the sand for a few weeks and waited for it all to blow over. But I realized, as you said, it was them reflecting how vulnerable I was making them feel.
Yes.
And rather than ruffling feathers and making them feel these things, they would rather, if I just shut up and stopped bringing up these emotions that they did not want to deal with.
Yes. And so what's very interesting is I think that men in their careers, the conversation around burnout is very different than women in their careers or business or whatever. And there's so much more resistance from what I've observed with men and careers with exactly what you just said. Don't talk about it. This doesn't exist. All of those things. And with women, we talk about it, we acknowledge it. However, the solutions are presented in this like fluffy self-care, take a bubble bath, everything will be okay. And if you do those things, which to a woman just feels like more on the to-do list of the 1,000-mile long to-do list that we keep in our heads every day. If you're not fixed, then it kind of switches into that more masculine shaming of like, you just don't hustle hard enough, or you're not a good enough mom, woman, business owner to be able to handle all of these things if you can't fix it with a bubble bath or 5 minutes of meditation. It's very interesting to watch how that conversation around burnout is playing out differently in how men experience it and talk about it, and how women experience it and talk about it.
And I just want to add an additional element from what I've seen in healthcare, with doctors and nurses going through burnout, and they're being told, oh, well, you've got the training, so you shouldn't be burning out. And that one really got to me, that it was, they're working on double shifts and they're seeing all the signs and symptoms. And as soon as they call it out and say they need the time to recover, it's like, oh, well, you got the training on burnout, so you shouldn't be burning out. So shame on you. It's so toxic. It was so toxic. And kind of going back a bit on the men, as you said, when men don't talk about it. When I burnt out the first time, I didn't know what burnout was. And someone says, oh, you've burnt out, take 4 weeks off work, you'll be back to normal in 4 weeks. That's not how it panned out. But I started researching burnout. What is this burnout thing? And I didn't find any men on podcasts speaking about burnout. There was women talking about burnout, and they told me about how women experience burnout differently to men. So I got that, I grasped that. But I didn't find any men speaking specifically about burnout. So I was like,
Right.
okay, so do men experience burnout? I know they experience it differently to women, but how do they experience it? And so I didn't speak up about it for a long time. And it wasn't until about 3 years after I had burnt out and was recovering and breaking my loop, so that I recognized the signs and knew how to break that loop, that I said, well, if I couldn't find any material out there, then I should at least document how I feel while I still remember it, while it's still somewhat fresh and raw, and that I can experience the feeling, just in case someone listens and they can relate and get the help they need, so they don't go through the same pain that I went through. And in doing so, especially when I started bringing on guests like you, I got men speaking up about their burnout experience and being like, you know what, it's great that you actually talk about these things, because many don't. And it was phenomenal. For me, I was like, just because I chose to speak up about it, I found other men speaking up about it too, who otherwise would not.
And that's the way it happens, right? It just takes one person to go, hey, what's the story? The emperor has no clothes. Like, we need to regroup here and be honest with ourselves. So kudos to you for doing that, because you're right. There's just not a lot of content out there for men around burnout. And I think the content that is around burnout for women, it's trying to get there, but it's not there. So I don't know if I told you when we were speaking before about this latest episode that I had a couple months ago about realizing that I was experiencing specifically social media burnout. So I take off the last 2 weeks of the year, every year. That is my, I throw my phone in the drawer. I don't do anything. I don't even schedule posts out. I let it all go. And it is such nourishing, rich time with my family and the holiday season, and just slowing down and being present. And this last year, about halfway through that 2 weeks off, I realized that I was having no food reactions, which has been my number one symptom with the Lyme disease and all the things that I've been trying to detox from my body for the last couple of years. And so it was just kind of this realization of, I'm not eating perfectly, and that's okay, but I'm not stressed about it. And I'm not having any food reactions. This is incredible. I'm done with this. I've healed myself. Everything's done. And then the Friday before coming back to work, for the new year. So I think the first Monday of the new year was like January 5th. The Friday before, I started kind of switching my brain into work mode. Like, how am I going to deal with my overloaded email inbox? And how am I going to approach my content marketing and my social media marketing and all of these things? And I started reacting to every single thing that and it was this lightning bolt moment of my body's reaction to burnout and stress is this histamine dumping of food reactions that doesn't have so much to do with the food as it does to social media and my nervous system being out of whack because of overconsumption, being on my phone too much, all of those things that comes with running an online business and creating content, and all of these things that everybody's told us we have to do at this. And I had this realization of, if I can take 2 years off of my business to focus on my health and reset and take a minute to really look at what I'm doing, then I can certainly take time off of social media to figure out how to run a business that doesn't require what everyone has told me I have to do on social media. Because social media, my body is clearly saying, please don't. Enough of this. We don't want this. And whether that means eventually I figure out how to do social media in a way that works with my body and isn't so stressful on my nervous system and all of those things, maybe I will get there. But for now, what my body is telling me is, please don't. And that has been the latest lesson I've learned in this continuous cycle of paying attention to burnout signs and symptoms and how to have a different relationship with what's causing those things. Like you said, it was your relationship to your work that caused the burnout, not the work itself.
Yeah, yeah. You did mention that in the pre-recording, and I loved it because it was like your body was reacting to something, and it would show because of the food. Because I know friends as well who break out in all these stress hives all the time, and it's like as soon as they take a vacation, all of this goes away. As soon as they get back into a project, into a marathon or into a project sprint, and they see it all comes up again, and it's like, oh, it must be the food again, or it must be the hay fever. And I'm like, no, there is a common cause that we're seeing here, but you don't want to address it because it's what pays the bill.
Well, we're so used to addressing symptoms, right? We're used to, I'm having this symptom, and it feels very complicated to think about deeper whys behind symptoms than I'm going to take an antihistamine, or I'm going to deal with the symptom as it's presenting itself instead of really doing the deep work around why is this happening in the first place.
Yeah, I actually just had a recent episode with a kinesiologist, and he was on about how he's a great example of pulling hair, and people treat the site of the pain is the scalp, and they're like, oh, I want to stop the pain, but the cause is the pulling of the hair.
Right.
And that was, it was such a great analogy for how we always try to treat the pain and not treat the cause.
Yeah.
And he was a lot of people using, and especially with high achievers, and you might have ergonomic pains from maybe lower back pain, or being a bit too sedentary and not moving enough, and next thing having all of these aches and pains, and the first thing they reach for is yes, tight neck. And the first thing they reach for is like NyQuil if they can't sleep because of the pain, reaching for ibuprofen and all these painkillers, or reaching for caffeine to get through the day or just push through it. And it's like they're trying to just compensate rather than look at what is the cause. And if you can treat the cause by stretching or applying heat or relaxing or just having better posture, doing some strength training also, and working on your core. These are ways of stabilizing the muscles so you don't have that lower pain or the lower back pain. And it's like, no, the quick fix is taking a painkiller. Yeah. And then that shuts off the warning signs. And for me, I was making a point with him that for years, I've hated taking painkillers. If someone told me to take ibuprofen, I'm like, why am I taking this? I was like, is it just to dull the pain? Because if it's to dull the pain, I'm setting myself up for further injury because I'm going to be stepping on, let's say, if it was my ankle, I'm going to be putting more pressure on that ankle when my body is telling me. So it was a great conversation about how, like, we might be experiencing pain in some place, but it might not be where we're experiencing it that is causing the pain. The cause could be somewhere else. So we have to look at what is causing the pain in the first place. We have to look, see the alarm bells, see the warning signs, see the red flags, and then find what is the root cause that is causing this, and how can we remove that.
Well, and your body is very, very smart. It knows exactly what it needs. It knows how to heal itself. All of those things. And we're so used to being detached from paying attention to all of those things. And what's interesting about what I had to do with detoxing and elimination diets and all of those things, and how when you go on an elimination diet, it becomes really obvious when you start adding things back in what your body's reacting to. I, at one point over the couple of years that I took off my business and was dealing with all this stuff, I was down to like 5 foods that I could eat. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There were 5 foods that I could eat, and that lasted for 2 months. And it was really severe, and it was one of the most difficult things like that I have ever done, is sticking to that just 5 foods. And as I started testing, bringing things back into my diet, it was really obvious the things I was more sensitive to, and how that mirrors the elimination diet I went on the last 2 weeks of the year with my phone and social media and email and all of those things. That was they call it a digital detox, but it's an elimination diet and just another way of saying it. And how not even getting back on my phone, but just switching into the mindset of thinking about all of those things, the email, the social media, the marketing, all of that started giving my body the reactions that I had been free of while I was on that digital detox elimination diet. It's so interesting how your body uses the same language to speak in all sorts of different situations, and it's just learning how to pay attention.
Yeah, it's again, that's the thing, that people don't like to listen to their body when it's like, oh no, it's giving me signals and I don't want to listen to them right now. I'm kind of busy and I feel that really don't have time for you to be complaining right now. I've got so much on my plate already. Until it brings everything to a halting stop. It's going to nag you for a while until it realizes nagging's not working. Then it's going to start screaming. And if you keep on dulling the screaming or snuffing it out, it's going to just be like, okay, this is it. No, no more. Bring you to a grinding halt. And that's when people usually start to listen.
Yes. But it takes it takes dedication and being willing to tweak and adjust what you're doing to try and deal with that problem. So maybe you realize you need some digital detoxing, or you need to have a different relationship with your to-do list or your calendar or social media or whatever it is. And you try something that you think will work. Maybe you think, I'm not going to look at my email inbox until lunchtime. Or, there's all sorts of things that you can do to try and help yourself and adjust. And what most people do is they get advice from someone that says, do this to fix this. And it doesn't work for them, and they give up and they go back to whatever habits and the deep neural pathway of however they conduct themselves or their relationship with their work or what they do. And they just give up instead of going, well, this didn't work for me, but why don't I try something else? Because I still need to solve the problem. And maybe it's just a matter of taking gold nuggets from lots of people you listen to, right? There's no shortage of advice on how to help you out there with whatever it is, whether it's podcasts or YouTube or books or any of those things, coaches. And what you have to remember is everybody is unique. Everybody has a different life experience or home situation or commitments and responsibilities. And you can't take somebody's template for what they say, do this thing and you'll solve all your problems, or you'll fix all the things, and do it 100%, and then it doesn't work for you for any number of totally valid reasons, and you throw it all away and just go, they don't know what they're talking about, or this doesn't work for me, or whatever it is, and then you go right back to the problem and nothing is solved. So being self-aware enough to go, well, I listened to this podcast and I'm going to take this little piece out of it and see if that works for me. And on the whole, this didn't. So I'm going to keep looking and keep trying and keep iterating every week or every day or whatever it is. Like, how can I tweak this? Because I don't feel quite there yet. I don't feel quite healthy in my mind, body, emotions, nervous system, whatever it is. So I'm just going to keep trying and keep tweaking and see what feels good and pay attention to what works and what doesn't. Because no one person, no one piece of advice, no one method or framework or system is ever going to work for you in its entirety. And you have to take personal responsibility to take what you need and leave the rest and keep working.
I know you mentioned a few times the narratives that people have around habit formation, when they might say, oh, that worked for Susan on Instagram, so I'm going to copy what Susan did. And then they say, oh, no, it doesn't work for me. And when they go back to the familiar habits, they say, oh yeah, it just wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. It's not what I do. And it's the identity, the familiarity you have with a certain identity that's not working for you. And then, so I help like identity-based habit formation when it's like, well, what's the identity you want to become? How would you like to feel? What kind of actions would it take to become that kind of? And then it's when the narrative comes back in, that keeps on the niggling negative self-narrative, I call it. And it's the one that says, oh, you skipped a day, or you missed a day, or you failed today. Mm-hmm. Like, it's obviously not working for you. So go back to what you know, go back to what you remember, go back to what's worked all these years, right. And that's where the internal dialogue is fighting, that it's like, go back to what's familiar versus who is the person you want to become. And right. I like how you mentioned a lot of what we see online is usually very like intense. It's supposed to grab our attention. So it's going right. to be it's going to be dramatized. It's going to be the strictest like carnivore diet or keto or something that or 5-day fasting or something like that sounds almost impossible. So that it sounds like there's already a barrier to entry. But if you see, oh, it worked for some guy on Instagram, I'm going to give it a try. It didn't work for me. I'm a failure. I'm always a failure. I'm never going to try again. Rather than bringing in micro habits, starting with things that are so small that it's more difficult not. And noticing when you not do them is like, oh, actually would have been easier if I just did that in the first place. So like one of my favorite examples when I first started out was to start every day with a smile. So when I went to brush my teeth, I would smile in the mirror for 6 seconds. And then I was like, okay, 6 seconds, that was my smile today. That's my win. I smiled at someone else. I smiled at my reflection. And I also received a smile from my reflection. So I've given a smile and I've received a smile. If I choose to smile for the rest of my day, that's a bonus, whether I choose to smile or not. But I've already kind of got the ball rolling. I've kicked off the momentum by starting my day with a smile. It will make the second smile and third smile easier.
Yeah.
And because I've already received a smile from my reflection, I'm not expecting others to smile back. So I don't feel that I need the validation of them smiling back because I already received my smile quota for today. And it sounds silly to some. It sounded ridiculous, but it was great because I found that I was smiling more. I was more comfortable with smiling. I was more comfortable with seeing my smile. And as a result of smiling at more people, I was more approachable. And then that had a compound effect about how many people would come up and start a conversation. How many people would find me approachable if they wanted help with something.
Right.
And it just, it's like snowballs over time. Something that sounds so ridiculously simple that, oh, that's not going to have a major effect on my life. It's not like reaching out to 1,000 leads. It's not doing cold DMs and all of this. It's something as small as drinking a glass of water or smiling at your reflection. These are the things that will compound over time and completely change.
Absolutely. Those tiny little things, like you said, micro habits, people underestimate the value of those small little actions every single day. I teach something called the MAP process, which is mindfulness, action, perseverance, and it's a constant. And the mindfulness is, how do I work the best? Or what are my energy levels? Like taking what you already know about yourself. For you, in that example, that might be, I need to do a micro habit to set my day up for success in a way that feels good. Like these are these little things and aspects that I want. For someone else, it might be, I need to not pick up my phone first thing in the morning. So I need to have it charging outside of my bedroom because I don't have the self-control if it's not on my nightstand to not pick it up. You know, all of these little things. It might be, I have really low energy in the afternoon. So I don't want to have my like deep focus work be in the afternoon because that's just not going to work for me. So the mindfulness piece of this loop is the, what do I know about myself? Whether it's things that I want to work on, micro habits, energy levels throughout the day, all of those things. And then the A is action. And that is, you just take your best guess. So if you're sitting down to map out your week, or you're considering commitments, whether that's like networking meetings or taking on a new project or a client, or you want to take action on, I'm going to implement all these things. I'm going to implement smiling in the mirror in the morning. I'm going to implement moving my deep work time to the morning instead of the afternoon, or not having meetings on Fridays because I really just want to do like low-key admin work in yoga pants and no makeup and, you know, all of those things. And then the perseverance piece is what most people miss. That is when they took action. They started with, what do I know about myself? I'm going to take my best guess and take action. And the perseverance is what worked and what didn't, and how am I going to tweak this for myself next week or tomorrow. So the, you know, maybe it's, to take your smiling in the mirror example, I think the morning is great, but maybe you're somebody who was like, that didn't really work for me. I want to do that before I go to bed instead of in the morning for whatever reason. That's kind of a silly example. Or maybe it's, you know, the morning didn't work for me for deep work time. Maybe I need to have a deep work day. Instead of every single morning, I need to make deep work on Mondays, or, you know, whatever it is. It's having the mindfulness to really take a look at what happened and what worked for you, what felt good, what didn't feel good, and come back to the mindfulness piece. The mindfulness piece next time is, I have all this information from taking action. And so how am I going to tweak that to iterate this process and make it better and better little?
I love that. It was similar to something when I first started out. Was my leeway model was around self-awareness, self-compassion, and self-care.
Yeah.
And because for me, when I heard the word mindfulness, when I burnt out, I was like, I don't know how to be mindful because I don't know, I don't know how to process any of my thoughts right now. I was so exhausted, and everyone said, "Oh, mindfulness is the cure for burnout," and I was like, I don't even know how to think. I don't know how to feel right now. So it made no sense to me whatsoever. And it was just being thrown around as, well, if you mindfulness, you'll never burn out. And it was so like dismissive of everything I knew. And I was like, okay, well, mindfulness doesn't work for me then. But when I found out I just needed to do a lot of self-reflection and become more aware of myself, how I was feeling, how to give words to how I was feeling. And in those moments, I was being mindful of myself.
Right.
And it was kind of realizing that. And I was like, okay, that was the self-awareness was important for me because I felt there was a bad I had a negative connotation with the word mindfulness at the time. The next step for me was having self-compassion. When I recognize my thoughts and the feelings that I have, that I don't berate or speak down to myself.
Right.
That the way I speak to myself should be the way I speak to my best friend. And if I find myself speaking to my best friend the way that I was speaking to myself the past 10 years, well, they wouldn't stay my friend for. So then when I start speaking to
True.
myself as someone that I'd like to keep around, no matter how they thought or how they felt, that I was like, okay, that I feel better about myself. And when I practice self-care, the narrative I had around the self-care routine or the habits I would take on had to be things that would serve me. So one example was what I thought was self-care was going for a run after work. And I realized when I went for a run, I was literally running away from my feelings and running away from my stress and chasing the runner's high, chasing the endorphins. But
Right.
then I'd come back from the run and it would all come flooding back. And then I'd go to work the next day and I'd be exhausted because I didn't recover from the run before. Or I wouldn't sleep well because I went for a run too late at night and I couldn't wind down. So I realized that running was not a self-care activity for me the way that I was doing it. It was me running, it was a form of escapism. And I found what self-care was going for an hour walk and maybe just going into nature, throwing on a podcast or not bringing my headphones and just be immersing myself in nature, letting myself think, letting myself regulate those thoughts and emotions. And that was self-care for me. Yes, it took longer than going for a run. If I wanted to, let's say, get into the default mode and experience nature, I'd have to go for a longer walk than if I was going for a run. But it was so much better for my recovery to allow myself, okay, what do I need to do in my day so that I can allow for a 1 hour walk?
When you're looking at your ideal week and you're planning your schedule, when you start with blocking off your non-negotiables that are important to you, such as sleep, an hour-long walk, having a real lunch break away from your desk, those things. And if you're a parent, maybe it's your non-negotiable is your school drop off and pickup time, right? Those don't move. Those aren't negotiable. A standing client meeting or whatever it is. When you put all of those things into your week and you realize how little time you actually have, it makes making decisions about what you do so much easier, because we tend to think in a very nebulous, idealistic way about our time, which is why we overcommit, or we leave all the self-care to squeezing it in after you do all the other things you really didn't have time for, but you committed to somebody, so you have to do it. All of that. When you see how little time you have during the day to do your actual work, beyond self-care, good sleep, real meals, all of those things, you can start saying no and having boundaries around things. So maybe it's you're not going to join that networking group that they meet every Thursday and you don't really understand what your schedule or your available time is. So something else gets squeezed out. And that leads to that feeling of like pressure and overwhelm and not enough time to do things like truly taking an hour walk that's restorative instead of a 30-minute run that's punishing and too much and not really what.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the non-negotiable aspect as well, because I think as well, high achievers, oftentimes people pleasers as well. And boundaries tend to get pushed because you're looking for that validation, or you don't want to be the one to say no, or you always want to be the one to help. There's the hero syndrome that comes in as well. But as soon as you set a hard boundary, people will push back at first because they're like, oh, but we always thought we could rely on you. We thought we could fall back on you. And that kind of hurts the first few times. But as soon as you push a hard boundary, you get more respect for when you do show up. You show up at your best rather than showing up kind of half committing to the work that you promised to do, because there's a bit of resentment. But when you set a hard boundary and say, no, this is non-negotiable for me, But when I do show up for the work that I do, I'm coming back recharged. I'm coming back with a clear mind. I'm coming back with a clear goal and
Mhm.
a clear direction of how I want to pursue this work. And
Right.
that is so much more productive, and it's so much more respected and more valuable to who you're serving. So for me, whenever I take something on, I'm like, am I showing up at my best? What do I need to do in order to show up at my best? And what hard boundary do I need to push if it means me showing up at my best or showing up with resentment or showing up at half of my capacity? And if I need to communicate that and say, if you want me to show up for 4 hours on a Wednesday, then that means I'm going to need to take 2 hours for a non-negotiable on Tuesday, or I'm going to need to start a bit later on Wednesday so that I'm not coming in at 6 a.m. and coming into a meeting at 7 a.m. Or
Yes.
or I need to make the time for myself somewhere in this, or I'm going to need to compensate afterwards to recharge before the next meeting. So I think as long as we have non-negotiables that we don't, let's say, push our own boundaries, that we say
It's a self-respect thing.
it is a self-respect, and oftentimes we've let that self-respect go for so many years because we're chasing the external validation,
Yeah.
whereas we earn that self-respect a lot more if we respect our boundaries, and we also respect other people's boundaries then as well, because we don't have the same expectations of them as we do as of.
Absolutely. Boundaries is such a fascinating discussion and topic. I also talk a lot about boundaries, particularly because it seems to show up a lot more with women, because women tend to take on multiple different roles in a way that men typically do not. There's always exceptions. There's the people pleasing, like you said. There's the hero complex. I want the gold star. It feels good to be that person for other people. And one of the biggest changes that I made when I started setting boundaries around networking and people wanting my time, when I got super, super clear on how little time I really have to work, I started saying no to coffee dates. Everybody wants the coffee dates, right? And when you're in a typical business networking group, how that usually happens is you meet with somebody and it's genuine and authentic, but it's also centered around how can I help you? How can you help me? Could you be a client? Could you refer me clients? All of that kind of song and dance we do with business and networking and meeting people. And I happen to live 20 to 30 minutes outside of town, which means if I'm going to meet somebody for coffee, that's like half of my working hours for the day, because I also have 2 kids. One's in school, one's in homeschooled. I have a lot of commitments on my time, and my work time has to be super focused and be really intentional and important. And when I meet somebody for coffee, that's like 2 to 2.5 hours out of my like 4 to 5 hour workday, if I'm lucky. So I developed a way to very politely decline coffee dates. And it's not about being like, I'm too good for this. It's done in a really polite, kind way. But the first few times I did this, I was nervous to do it, because who am I to decline somebody who could potentially be a client or a referral or whatever? And I could tell that it was strange for people to not accept and to have that boundary, and that it was unexpected. And I can't control how other people take it as far as what story it brings up for them and what they're telling themselves. I have no control over that. The only thing I can have control over is being polite and kind and clear and coming at it from an authentic and intentional way. But the freedom it gave me to not feel that resentment, obligation, reaction, knowing that I don't have time for this and this is going to mess up my week. And that means I'm going to have to push my content creation to a different day or whatever it is. I'd have all these like resentment feelings, and the freedom it gave me to just let go of that very impactful and continues to be impactful for me. So now I will do coffee dates with people, but it's usually once I've already gotten to know them in some other way, whether it's through other people we know around town or a networking group that I go to because I'm interacting with, 30 people instead of one person. So it's a little bit better use of my time from the get-go. It's usually only people that I've already established a friendship or a friendly relationship with. And that has really taken that weight off my shoulders as far as time. And
Yeah, that's great because, as you said, if you're meeting someone for the first time for coffee, and as you said, you don't know, is it networking, is it client or not, that it's a different coffee date than if you already know the person.
yeah,
So you are showing up differently, you're presenting yourself differently, and you can see that that's a cost on your time if it's half of your workday gone. And that's where you're setting a boundary, because if the coffee date did not go as well as planned, you would harbor a lot of resentment against that person on the first impression, which is and you might show up differently as well, because
Yes.
you might be harboring the resentment because you've lost out on half of a workday.
right.
So that's a boundary that you're setting, both for the benefit of you and of the other person, because of how you show up and how you present yourself.
Yes. Yes. And there's a whole nother conversation in there about how not having good boundaries leads to burnout on so many different levels. The biggest tip that I have as you're considering what to commit to, what your weekly plan looks like, what your boundaries are, the biggest thing that helps is leaving a white space in your. It is not downtime. It's not lazy time. It's not, you're not being productive. It's buffer time against life's unpredictable chaos.